So thanks for the opening prayer, Rich. And
Yep.
yeah, and so I just want to say a couple of things, and then we'll go into our meetings. It's first of all, just thank you so much for taking time out in such a busy schedule to be here, uh, and even more importantly than that, thank you so much for taking the time to be leadership in our church. You know, your generosity of time, your generosity of wisdom uh, is so important. So thank you. You inspire me. And I also want to say that in terms of the context of the greater context that we live in, uh, the church is not immune to the problems of the world around us, right? And so, in the last decade or so, the town meetings are simply fraught with tension. If any of you are on school boards, lots of difficulties, lots of tension, people not treating each other in a respectful way. And with vestries, we just go by a different mode. We are followers of Jesus, and we're not immune to the tensions of our society. And yet at the same time, we're called to a different way of being. So I just invite you to come in this with your best selves, as I know you do. Ian Douglas, the former Bishop of Connecticut, he said that in recent years, when you wake up in the morning and you watch the news, your bucket of stress is already full. And so then when you go in to do other things, even church things that sometimes are small become big, because your bucket is overflowing. So I just invite us all to live by the way of Jesus, live by a different way. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next hour. But vestries are so important to our church, and your leadership is so important to our church. So what we're going to examine in this next hour are the best ways to do that, the most Christ-centered ways to do that. And so now I'm going to hand it off to Rich, his 10 commandments.
Yeah. 10 Commandments sounds very bold, doesn't it, y'all? Like now I can't see your faces because we're on screen sharing, but it's somewhat bold. And really canons to the ordinary, I think, don't get to make commandments. They make suggestions. But these are suggestions that come out of my time as a rector at St. Francis Holden, where I was before I had this position. And what I didn't know when I accepted this, I still would have accepted it, but I spend a lot of time with you all at vestry meetings. I think the most I've had in a month was 11. And so when I tell fellow clergy that, one vestry meeting a month, that's nothing when you have a bunch. So these commandments, these suggestions really grow out of just my own experience and thoughts about what works and what doesn't work. You can push back. We'll have time for conversation. You can challenge some of them. Some of them are meant to be fun, but they're also meant to be rooted in, as I say, that experience with vestries in this diocese, which is really where I've served my ordained life. So let's go, Vicky. We'll just go through them. I'll maybe pause a couple times, make a few comments, but I just want to go through them, and then we can talk a little bit about the whole before we turn it back to the bishop. This is number one, and it parallels the one about having no other gods before us. I think sometimes we take too little responsibility as vestry. We think, oh, we're just a rubber stamp, or we're this, or we just have to show up. And sometimes we take too much, especially when a congregation's in transition. I think wardens sometimes feel the burden of leadership. And so number one is remember that God is God and you are not. And remember that no one is indispensable to the life of a congregation. Not a rector who's been there a long time, not a senior warden who's been there a long time. No matter how large or how small the parish is, constantly be looking to raise up new leaders and recruit them. Why? Because every vestry needs some balance of historical memory and some new blood. And vestry service should never be like an appointment to the Supreme Court. You shouldn't have to die to get off the vestry. That's what I mean by that. So if there's nobody else to do this work, it probably means no one else, or the right person at least, has not been asked. So again, it returned to where I started. No, you are not in charge, God is. And because God's in charge, I think we are called as God's people to trust the Holy Spirit, to really trust the Holy Spirit. Sometimes in transitions, I haven't done it as much recently, but when I began, I would say, whose church is this? And sometimes people think it's the priest's church, and then they're lost when the priest leaves. Sometimes people say it's their church. But I say the church's one foundation is Jesus Christ, her Lord. We do well to always remember that it's Christ's church. This is how God does God's mission in the world, is through the church. And the risen Christ promised to send the Holy Spirit whenever two or three gather together to lead us into all truth. So discernment on a vestry is not about who shouts the loudest or who has the most power in their secular job. It's about active listening to God and to each other. Okay, next, yep. Again, this is not, you can tell I didn't make this up, right? This is the Bible. This is St. Paul. There's one body with many members, and we all have different gifts. If we get to a short video tonight, I want to show it to you. But if we don't, we'll give you the link and you can watch it on your own. It's only 6.5 minutes. But what I think is the most important gift on a vestry, among other gifts, is to be resilient, non-anxious people who are not afraid of conflict. There are people in every congregation in this diocese. I won't ask for names tonight, but there are people who like to pour gas on a fire. And there are people who, no matter what, will never face a conflict. No how, never. That's not the church. We all just are nice to each other all the time. And I think neither of those are helpful in terms of being the church and particularly being a vestry. What we want to do on a vestry is have people who can express their point of view, but also fight fair. And I use, sorry, it's a sports metaphor and it's a violent sports metaphor, but I think vestry service is more like boxing than the WWF. Not anything goes. And I wish I could say I have not been at vestry meetings in this diocese that didn't feel like the WWF at times, where the World Wrestling Federation, for those who don't know that abbreviation. And it's pretty awful. It's pretty awful for everybody there. Sometimes people quit vestries because there's a bully on the vestry. So, you know, sometimes we're going to have to fight, but we fight fair, no hitting below the belt. Boxing at least has some rules. Put a helmet on. I think this is a Bishop Fisher quote, but I've sort of I've used it so often that I don't remember if he got it from somebody or if I got it from somebody and he got it from them or however that worked. But we are not the body of Christ because we agree with each other. We are the body of Christ because we care about each other. And I really want to help make that a mantra across the diocese. Disagreement, conflict is not anti-Christian. What's anti-Christian is pouring gas on a fire or never dealing with the conflict and thinking it'll just go away if we just keep meeting and are nice. We have to figure out how to work through conflict together. And that's one of the most important things I'll say to you tonight. Also ask regularly whose voice is not at this table and how do we invite, welcome, and connect those voices to the work that we're called to do. Number 4. Oh, no, this isn't quite number 4, but this is just a joke to see if you're still awake. Okay, number 4. Become an intentional learning community. There are lots of ways that you can do this, but I am always amazed at the level of resistance. We think we have a culture, I think, of perfectionism, and I think perfectionism is the enemy of spiritual growth. Again, bigger than vestry. So we think, oh, we go in vestry, we have to get it right. We don't have to get it right. We have to learn from our mistakes. And I think that is not something that's a little bit countercultural, I think, these days, at least in some communities. So if you sit on a vestry, and this is what that previous slide was meant to lead into, but you don't have the time or the energy to really do anything. Sometimes I go into a vestry and they say, well, so-and-so hasn't shown up for 4 months. Well, if they haven't shown up for 4 months, it's the time to politely say, this might not be the right time in your life to be doing this work. But I think it's more than the meetings. I think every vestry should have retreats, planning retreats. Every vestry should begin with dwelling in the word or some kind of prayer time. Every vestry should have continuing ed, things like we're doing tonight. And a lot of you are here, which is great. But if you don't have the time in your life to do it, then this is probably not the right time to do this ministry. And again, go back to number 1. The church will not fall apart if you don't do it. Do it when it's the right time. But if somebody told you, and I know this happens across the diocese, somebody said, oh, it's not too much work. We'll just put your name on there. You'll get elected at annual meeting, and all you have to do is show up for 10 vestry meetings a year because we don't meet in the summer. They lied to you, maybe on purpose, maybe not on purpose, but find a different ministry, because there's no such thing as a born vestry person. There is a steep learning curve, and we have to figure out how to keep learning. The best learning experiences are when we mess up, when we make a mistake, and then we figure out, what did we learn here? And if we can keep asking that question, our vestries will get more resilient and stronger. Number 5. Bring your best self to vestry. The bishop alluded to this, and I think sometimes if we've had an exhausting day, if work is hard, if the kids are going through a tough stage in their own life, if we're exhausted, if we want to get home as quickly as possible, it's not easy to bring our best selves to vestry meetings, and I think we all know that. But all of you, and I see so many people here, I've sat at your vestry tables, I know you, I know how faithful you are, to try to channel your skill, your resilience, what you're able to do in your workplace. Bring those skills with you so that you can say, you know what, we can work this out, and don't be passive. And this is about talking in vestry. This is also something I observe a lot of when I'm a guest at vestry meetings. There are usually 2 or 3 talkers who overshare, and sometimes 2 or 3, or sometimes more people who never say a word through the entire meeting. Now, I am super aware that we have introverts and extroverts on here, and some people are more comfortable sharing and some are not, but we have to know ourselves. And when something new needs to be said, say it. If you are a slower processor or an introvert, I don't think those are the same. Sometimes you'll have your best thoughts at 2 a.m. after the meeting. I get that. Mm-hmm. And other people think out loud. They are external processors. They get juiced by this and they just keep wanting to talk. So be self-aware, but try to figure out ways for everybody at the table. Everybody has wisdom, and it's okay. I do it when I'm with your vestries. I'll say, we haven't heard from so-and-so. I try not to say, we've heard from so-and-so 11 times now, but I try to just make sure I keep inviting people in. But if you're the one that's always doing the talking, know where the break is. If you're always listening, that's a great gift to a vestry, but also know where the accelerator is and speak up when you need to. For me, this is a big one that a lot of time, a lot of our vestry meetings, I think, are routine. We have treasurer's reports and we have the minutes from the last meeting and so on and so forth. There's sort of structural pieces. Sometimes I think we get bogged down in those. I've been at meetings where the treasurer's report takes way too long, and really it should be pretty quick. You know, how are we doing this month? We already passed the budget. Let's check in on it and then let's move forward. We do not need to spend 20 minutes on the budget. Even if the place is falling apart and we're even in big deficits, then let's schedule a special meeting and talk about how we deal with that. But front load the big decision stuff. If there's a big decision you need to make as a congregation, don't put that as the last thing on the agenda. Please, please, please. Figure out how to, and you all make agendas differently, I realize. I think one of the ways I would suggest is that the rector and wardens, sometimes the rector and executive committee, sit down and make the agenda, but front load the hard stuff and dive into it. And then you can put the treasurer's report at the end or whatever. I'm not knocking the treasurer's report, it's important, but it should be a little more perfunctory. And then also, sometimes you need information. So I think sometimes people get in a crisis, and you've probably all been in meetings, not just in the church, but in the world, where somebody says, this great opportunity just presented itself, but we have to act today. And if we don't act today, it won't be there next month. I will confess to you, that makes me crazy. And I think it's very rare that that's true. Both Doug and Vicky hear me say a lot, because I really love Stephen Covey's stuff. Sometimes things are really important, but they're not urgent. And so the really important stuff, present information, let everybody talk at a vestry meeting, and wait and make the decision next month or the month after. However, make the decision. Don't just keep having the same meeting over and over again where you're going over the same ground. That's not moving forward. That's not making a decision. That's just circling around and driving everybody nuts. We're getting there. To me, this is a little nuanced, so I'll talk about it and then I'll come back and sort of read this or however, but I want to unpack it a little bit. Most of us I think most of the people on the screen, because again, I see you, I know you. Um, you're probably pretty good at making discernments in your own life. You can make decisions about things. You're going to paint your house, you're going to redecorate your house, you need a new car. You can make those decisions. But when you get a group to make a decision, you have to all look at it together. And it can't be somebody railroads it through and then everybody else just says, oh, okay, well, that was the rector or that was the senior warden or that was whoever that made us do that. We're all responsible in a vestry make decisions. What I have found super helpful, we really got it, I think, down to an art form almost when I was in Holden, is if let's say we were trying to pick between A or B, and but some people wanted A and some people wanted B. Instead of immediately going back and forth and back and forth, well, I want A, well, I want B, then you raise the conflict, right? Well, I want A and I really mean it. Well, I want B and I really mean it. If you look at A fully, the whole vestry, look at it together, look at the pros and the cons, and say, how is this, how would this help us? Are there things that would not be helpful? And then look at B the same way, so that you're all on the same team. You don't have to pretend to say something you don't believe, but at least you can be quiet in that time. But let A and B be fully explored by the whole vestry. Uh, Sometimes a C option will emerge, but I think sometimes as Anglicans, we rush to the C option because we don't like conflict and we want everybody to be happy. So we split the baby, right? In a Solomonic way. We just sort of say, well, we'll go halfway between, and then nobody's happy. But if you explore A fully and explore B fully, sometimes a C emerges, but more often clarity emerges on we're actually pretty close on this. There's one person who feels really strongly, but everybody else is kind of on the same page. And I put down here again, I'm making up that a vestry is 15. Most of our vestries are not that big anymore. But if you have an 8-7 vote on anything, I get asked this question a lot in my job. Well, we think it's going to be like an 8-7 vote, calling a new rector, for goodness sake. No, that's not a consensus. But consensus doesn't mean unanimity either. And sometimes one or two people hold up the vestry from moving forward. So if it's more like 11-2, that's pretty significant consensus. And each vestry can develop their own norms, but talk about it. Talk about your own processes. Come up with a vestry covenant and do say, yeah, we hear a minority of one or two. They get to have their say, but we're going to move forward. And we love you and we know that you love us and we're going to do that. I think it's really important to hear minority reports because otherwise we get into groupthink. But we can't let the minority keep us from moving forward when we need to move forward. Be outward looking. I think this is super hard because I think a lot, especially post pandemic, a lot of our vestries are trying to figure out how do we keep the place open? How do we repair the building? There are less people, there are less pledges. How do we do this work? But we're always looking inside. If we're always looking inside, we will never be doing the gospel, which also calls us to look and say, who's not here? What would it be like for us to be missionaries together? There's a kind of magical thinking that happens that I see in search where people think if they just call the right new rector, all of a sudden people that look like that new rector, often it's a young person, they will all find their way here. It's not how it works. The clergy are very good in this diocese, but they're not the primary missionaries. The primary missionaries are the lay people. And so it works, it's helpful at vestry meetings to brainstorm ways of how to get to and reach those people who have no church at all, not to steal them from the neighboring Episcopal church, but to really reach out to those who are unchurched but are curious and interested and need to know about the love of Jesus that we proclaim. Number 10, 10 suggestions, 10 commandments. Uh, Pray without ceasing and pray like you mean it. You're not a board of directors, you are a gathering of Christian leaders. And so we need to act like that. And we need to pray not as functional atheists, right? We'll, say an 8-second prayer and ask God to be there, but now we're going to move on and we're going to take care and we're going to sort of fight our own agendas out. Pray as people who truly are inviting God into the conversation and pray for each other, especially the ones who drive you absolutely crazy. Pray for them the most. You don't have to do it out loud. You don't have to look them in the eye and pray for them at the vestry meeting, but pray for them, pray for them, pray for them, because they bring gifts to this work as well. Almost always, maybe always. So you can some vestries. Thanks, Vicky. Some vestries, most vestries, I think, in this diocese begin with prayer. A lot of times they think that's the clergy work, right? So I know, how do I know this? Because when a cleric leaves, retires, takes a new call, and I come in and I say, who's going to pray tonight? They all look at me and say, well, that's your job. And I can pray. I could even pray tonight spontaneously when the bishop was a little late. But I would encourage you all to have a rotation where you take turns praying each week. And some clergy, I think, are less thrilled with that, but I think most are very thrilled with that. And just find a way that you take time to pray. Some vestries have a chaplain that if things are getting a little heated or things are getting a little conflicted, somebody can just say, sometimes that's the person running the meeting, let's just take a breath. Let's just say a prayer here in the middle, and then we'll return to the work. You don't only have to pray at the beginning and the end. You're allowed to pray in the middle too. So I think
Rich,
that's, yeah,
would you
yes.
mind saying a word about mutual ministry review before we shift over to Bishop Fisher?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. And if we want to come back and talk about some of these commandments, suggestions, we can do that after the bishop does his piece and we'll sort of put it all together. Yes, mutual ministry reviews. I like to do those, especially when there's a new cleric and with a new vestry within 6 months. That's in their letter of agreement. But a lot of people are surprised to know that it's there to do one every year. Annually, there should be a mutual ministry review. That's not an evaluation of the clergy. That's an evaluation of how we're doing as a vestry, how we're doing as a community of leaders, including the rector, but not exclusively the rector or priest in charge. So it's mutual ministry review. Mary Rosendale can do those too, but as I said, I like to do them, especially when they're new, because often in the first year, things kick up, right? Sometimes the priest will say to me, well, they're not the congregation that their profile said they were. And sometimes the vestry or senior warden will say to me, well, they're not the priest that their profile. So there's things to work out. And I prefer to be, not because I'm better at it than Mary, but just because Mary's a parish priest and I'm working for the bishop directly. So it's good if I do those, but you can't apply for a ministry development grant without doing an MMR. And I often have people saying, oh, we've never applied for a grant, but now we see we have to do this. You don't have to apply for a grant every year, but you should schedule mutual ministry review at least every 18 months, if not every year.
Thanks a lot, Rich.
Yep. On to you, Bishop.
And we'll come back to Rich for all kinds of questions. But right now we're going to shift gears and learn a little something about leadership styles.
Yeah, well, again, thanks, Rich. And there'll be the possibility for questions with Rich after this. And, I look around this room and there's so many people with so much experience. And so I'm going to talk about leadership styles. And through the years, you have developed your own leadership styles. And I'm just going to bring up 4 of those styles. And no one is better than another. And the fact is that we need all of them. And so, just as I said in my opening remarks, that we need your best self in the room. We need you in the room and what the experiences that you bring to this work. So this is a process that I learned, about 10 years ago from a person who studies leadership. And he says there's 4 different styles of leadership. There's probably more, but for this presentation, there's going to be 4. So one of those is the leader who's relational. And that means someone who's really dedicated to making sure everybody in the parish and the vestry knows what's going on, that everybody feels welcome, that everyone's voice feels heard. And that's really important. We're about relationships. So it's crucial to our church to develop relationships. And so part of that is to get everybody on board. But sometimes it goes to the degree where it stops decisions from being made. So the person who's relational is wonderfully transparent, great at communications, great at getting people involved. And then, as Rich mentioned as one of his 10 commandments, sometimes something comes to a vote. And someone who's about relational leadership, getting everybody on the same page, have said to me, they said, Bishop, we put this controversial issue up for a vote and we couldn't get enough votes. And they said, well, what were the votes? And they said, well, there's 12 people on our vestry, and 10 voted yes, and 2 voted no. We didn't have enough votes. Well, the great gift is the person being relational. The great gift is the person being transparent in communication, and people caring about someone. And at the same time, that's only one perspective. It's only one perspective. So there's other perspectives. Another perspective, we call relational green, just so people can imagine it. And so we'll go to the next one of the 4. And that's the person, the leader, who, again, is really important and really needed. And that's the leader who's evidence-based. Most often on vestries, this is the treasurer who says, well, here's the evidence. Here's what we want to do, and here's how much money we have. It's the person who says, we say our church is growing. Well, what's the evidence that our church is growing? Well, the person, when someone says we need a capital campaign, then trust me, capital campaigns are important. They're really good to do. And the person might say, so we need to raise $1 million in our capital campaign. Well, the evidence-based leader will say, what's the evidence that says that we can raise $1 million? And maybe it's there, maybe it's not, but we need the evidence. So someone says, what's the facts about this? And again, that's a really good person to have on your vestry. Someone who looks for the facts, someone who looks for the evidence. Just like it's really important to have someone on our vestry who's about relationships, about getting everyone involved, about getting everyone on board. So our next one. And we're going to call this the blue one. And that's the leader that looks for the big picture. The leader that says, what are our goals? And then how do we go about meeting those goals? So the big picture person would say, let's lay it out. Let's lay out what the goals are. And then when we meet, say how much closer we become to those goals. So that's me, which is probably appropriate for a bishop. It's also for any of you who are firstborn out there. This is usually probably your approach. What's the goal? How do we achieve the goal? How are we getting closer to the goal? The big picture thinkers. The next one. So calling this red, and that's the leader that says, if it's not fun, why are we doing this? The big part of following Jesus is the experience of joy. And if following Jesus just brings difficulty and conflict and sacrifice, and it brings sacrifice, but it's not all that. How are we experiencing joy in this work? How is it really fun? I'm serious about this. How is it fun to be on this vestry? And so another part of that, if it's not fun, why are we doing it? Is the leader these leaders in this category will often be the leaders when something comes up that's new and difficult. Instead of saying, oh, geez, we've never done this before. How are we going to do it? The leader who's in this category, if it's not fun, why are we doing it? Says, hey, we've never done this before. We've never faced this controversy before. We've never faced this problem before. Let's see how we can do this. And so all 4 of those perspectives are really needed. The person who wants to communicate, the person who wants to get everybody on board, the person who wants to know the facts, the person who wants to know the big picture, who creates the big picture, the person who says, if it's not fun, why are we doing it? And on our vestries, for me, our diocesan council, on our standing committee, we need all 4 of those things, because any one of those things is important, but it's limited. It's only one part of it. And another part of that, to understand that, is to say when there are disagreements on a vestry, is to be able to say, we might have different perspectives on this, but I need your perspective. So the person who's big picture, the person who says, here's the goal, or we get into the goal, needs someone who's relational, who says, is everyone hearing this? Is everyone on board with this? need someone that says, is this based on fact? Is this just a dream, or is this possible for us, the evidence-based people? And we need someone who said, if it's not fun, why are we doing it? Someone that brings joy to it. So instead of being threatened or opposed by someone who has a different leadership style than us, it's an invitation to bring that in, to say, yeah, you know what? I didn't see it that way. I didn't see that part of it. And together, which is so much a big part of being church, is together as a community, we come to decisions. And we come to those decisions by hearing all those voices and not being threatened by them, but by seeing them as complementary. Oh yeah, you bring something that I don't bring. Thank God. Yeah, so to bring it, to bring in something really personal, I'm the firstborn. My wife is the youngest of 6. We see things in a totally different way from the way we were raised. And thank God, because I miss things that she sees and she misses things that I see. So let's do that as vestries. Let's appreciate the different styles of leadership. And as you decide what type of leader you are, I frequently experience people who say, well, I'm a little bit of everything. And that's okay. But then another part of that to get to that place is to say, when you're under pressure, which is the style of leadership that you go to? When you're under stress, which is the one you go to? And that's probably your primary style of leadership, which then opens up to other styles of leadership. So we'll open up that for questions a little bit later. And just for a moment, Rich and I will talk about collaboration, which has been a major theme of my leadership with all of you over these past 12 years, to collaborate with one another. And I think that Rich and Mickey and Lainey and I model that, that we truly rely on one another. And so in terms of collaboration, I always invite us to collaborate with other Episcopal churches, to collaborate with other churches. A constant refrain I get since COVID is we just don't have enough volunteers. We've got these great missions, but we don't have enough volunteers. Well, maybe if you collaborated with the UCC down the block, or the Lutheran Church, or the Roman Catholic Church, or the Jewish synagogue, or the Muslim mosque, together we might do this work. But another dimension of collaboration is that, I visit a different church every Sunday, and churches will say, our big burden is we have a big building. That's our big burden. You're not the only church with a big building that's finding challenges with that. Or you might say that we're a church that we really need young families. Guess what? You're not alone. And so the job of our diocesan staff is to help bring you together, to know that you're not alone. You are not the first church that's ever experienced having a big building and high costs and what to do with it. And there's no magic answers for that. But you're not in that alone. You're with that with our diocesan staff. You're with that with other churches facing the same thing. So over and over again, our stress on collaboration is that you are not alone. Other people face the same thing, and we want to be in communication with each other, and we want to support each other. So Rich is going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think I did say I would, but I think you covered it pretty well. I want to go back to the colors for just a moment and share 2 very brief anecdotes, and then maybe one short thing on collaboration. The bishop said this, but I just want to, I think sometimes, and this, I deal with we've had a lot of new clergy, right? A lot of changes in the diocese. Sometimes we want our clergy to be equal parts of all 4. And as Doug said, everybody has some of each, but, especially in stress, there's one place. You probably can tell me where your clergy are, but no cleric in this diocese, no bishop in this diocese, no canon in this diocese is equal measures of all 4 and can be all things to all people all the time. So I think the key, which again was said, but I just want to double down on it, that we do it all the time. I've never worked for a more collaborative leader than the one I work for right now, who is always saying, what do you think? What do you think? And listens for that. And I think if a priest is all blue, all big picture, then they need to learn to value, and you need to raise up wardens and executive committee members that help complement where their blind spots are. So I think that fits in and connects with both what we were talking about, the 10 Commandments thing, but also the colors of leadership. And I also just want to share with you all, because we've been doing this now for what, 11 years together, Doug? When the bishop asked me if I would take this job, he said, "We'll have fun." And he used both words. He's more blue. He revealed as blue, but he wanted us to have fun. I will tell you, in 11 years, there have been some days that have been less than fun, but there has not been a single day where there wasn't joy. And my colleague Sarah Anderson, who does my job for the ELCA for the Lutherans, one of her little slogans is, "We can do hard things together." And what I just want to say is, even if you're a fun person, uh, think about substituting the word joy in there, because if every day has to be fun, then you're going to avoid some of the hard stuff. But even the hard stuff can become fun, like hiking up. You can come up with your own list of what those things are, but there's joy in it. And there's been joy in this work for me, joy at your vestry tables, even when we do hard stuff together. It doesn't have to be lighthearted all the time. I think what I would say about collaboration is it's a necessity. We have, beyond the things that Doug mentioned, congregations have to cooperate together. What's their fear behind that? Their fear is the bishop or the canon of the ordinary are going to make us merge if we talk to our neighbors. I promise you, we are not going to do that. All the mergers that have happened in this diocese have been grassroots oriented, and they've come to us and said, we might be better together than we are separate. But at the very least, we have to collaborate to do the work that God has given us to do in this time, for sure. And so we collaborate with Lutherans. We have a collaboration across the boundary of 495, which no one 10 years ago thought could ever happen in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that Dio Mass and Western Mass could work together to have a collaboration. But there's all kinds of collaborations. And always, 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 there's some clash of culture, not just Lutherans and Episcopalians, not just across diocesan lines, but even if two neighboring parishes, sometimes one was the old mill owners church and one was the mill workers church, and there's different cultures there, and now they're trying to figure out how they bring those cultures together. So it's not easy, but it's not just important. I think it is the work now. We need no more Lone Ranger priests, and we need no more Lone Ranger congregations. We need people to collaborate and take it seriously. I think we have time where this is the audible at the line of scrimmage thing, but I think I'd like you to see this video. I'd like us to watch this video together, I think, because I think it builds on what we've been talking about too. Are we there, Vicky? Can we do that?
Yep. Coming up,
And
Rich.
I'll just preface it by saying 2 books I would recommend to all of you for vestry leadership. One is Quietly Courageous by Gil Rendell, and the other is A Failure of Nerve by the late Rabbi Ed Friedman. And both of those deal with the same issues, but of family dynamics. I don't see you all now, or I'd ask for a raise of hands, and it's okay that Vicky's here because she's going to get this set up. But I think in every congregation in the diocese, at one point or another, people have said to me, and I know they've said it to our bishop, we're just like a family here. And that's great. But most families are complicated, right? I always want to say, like on Thanksgiving Day, when you have a whole bunch of different political opinions at the table or theological opinions, like that kind of family. So Ed Friedman's work in particular, Rendell's work builds on it, is about we learn to behave. Doug alluded to this. I'm also an oldest child. We learn how to be in community based on what we learn in our families, but then we go into churches, and if we are just like a family, it means we're going to act out in some ways like what we learned in our families, and particularly around issues of conflict. So there's some stumbling blocks that come, and I just want you to know this resource is there, both of those books, but it's a little quirky, it's a little trippy, but I think it'll get the message across, and I think it'll be worth it, and then we'll have some time for conversation at the end. Okay, Vicky.
Can you say the first title again?
Say it again.
Say the
It's
first.
by Rabbi Ed Friedman, and it's called A Failure of Nerve. You can tell by both titles, right? I think courage is one of the gifts we most need to cultivate in the church among ordained and lay, is courage. And Friedman's book is called A Failure of Nerve. You can find them both on Amazon easily.
Sorry.
That's all right. We're a learning community, Vicky.
Thank you. I'm going to do this another way. Second.
I'll stall for time while Vicky's doing that, and when she finds it, we'll go right to it because I don't want to run out of time. But to me, this is about. I don't know if this ever happens in your congregation, but sometimes the vestry meets, and then sometimes there's a parking lot meeting after the meeting where stuff gets talked about, and those things can be very disruptive. Those triangles that happen in congregations, or somebody says nothing at the meeting, but they have lots to say the next day to other people about what others said. So yeah, I can put them in the chat, Tina.
I got
the
it.
chat.
I got it, Rich. We're going to roll.
Okay, you roll and I'll put it in the chat while we're watching.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Yep.
A leader is someone who influences a group of individuals to accomplish a common goal, whether that goal is to design a fuel-efficient car, respond to an international military crisis, or find a new company health plan. Now, there are many different ideas out there about how to become an effective leader. Some suggest that leaders must have certain traits, such as intelligence or self-confidence, sociability, maybe even being tall. Others say it's about technique or skill that leaders can acquire. But in A Failure of Nerve, the late Edwin Friedman goes against the grain of leadership studies and suggests that effective leadership is not about traits or skills as much as it is an emotional process of regulating one's own anxiety. He refers to this process as self-differentiation, or knowing where one ends and another begins. This is a systems perspective on leadership, rooted in cell biology. Take this healthy biological cell. It has a nucleus, which controls the activity of the cell. It has these mitochondria floating around here. And it has a cell membrane, which keeps the cell separate from other cells when they hang out together to form biological tissue, like this heart. This heart cell is differentiated. It knows its purpose is to pump blood. Bum, 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 bum. Despite what these uppity brain cells may think. Bum, 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 bum. Not only are we humans made up of these cells, we function like them. We also form ourselves into groups, whether these are families, companies, or nations. Like an individual cell, a differentiated person can stay connected to others without losing his or her identity, or without taking on the emotional anxiety of the group. A differentiated leader can take a well-defined stand even when followers disagree, while remaining connected in a meaningful way with others. Now here's the deal. Some people in these organizations are poorly differentiated, and they act like viruses. Viruses do not have a nucleus or a core organizing principle, so they cannot exist on their own. Rather, they look for other poorly differentiated cells that are easy to latch onto. Well, this may look like harmless workplace gossip, but what they are doing is infecting the organization with their anxiety. They cannot handle one-on-one conflict with another person, so they attempt to rope in a third person, thinking this will lessen the anxiety. This is what Friedman calls emotional triangles. And if you are the one being roped in or triangled, it's so tempting to enmesh yourself with the drama. It's even flattering. Hey, you are being asked to help out in a situation, so this person must really trust you. But don't do it. Don't get triangled, because this only leads to getting stuck. and only results in more anxiety in the system. And the infection spreads. And worse, it's bad for you. Friedman says that the chief cause of stress and burnout is not overworking like we all think, but getting stuck in other people's problems or getting triangled. But the differentiated leader is like the emotional immune system of an organization. By being a non-anxious presence, differentiated leaders resist being triangled, which influences others to take responsibility for themselves. This is very counterintuitive to those of us who are used to chronically anxious organizations. But Friedman says that differentiated leaders are able to tolerate other people's discomfort because this encourages them to take personal responsibility. In the long run, the differentiated leader's presence has the effect of diffusing the anxiety in the organization, allowing it to develop and function in a healthy way. Now, about sabotage. Some organizational systems are chronically anxious. In other words, they have a lot of people who are poorly differentiated. Such an organization will be threatened by the presence of a differentiated leader because, in a way, this upsets the way things have always been, or the homeostasis of the organization. So, the chronically anxious organization will inevitably turn on the differentiated leader. But according to Friedman, sabotage is a sign that the leader is doing the right thing, and it's the leader's non-anxious response to such sabotage that defines the differentiated leader. This, he says, is the key to the kingdom of effective leadership. The beauty of this approach to leadership is that it applies to anyone at any leadership level, whether you are, as Friedman says, a parent or a president. Finally, differentiated leadership is not a static condition. None of us arrives completely at this place. Rather, differentiated leadership is a direction in life, a direction toward maturity. And the only way we can get moving in that direction is to take care of ourselves.
All right, I think we want to do some Q&A, or you're welcome to make comments. There's been really three parts, right? The Ten Commandment part and the leadership style that the bishop did, and then this systems theory stuff, which sometimes gets in the way and creates sabotage. So where do you want to go? What do you want to do? We have 5 or 6 whole minutes.
You can unmute, you can raise your hand, your real hand, you can put up your little raise hand emoji.
Questions, concerns?
Ah, Tina Page, you're on.
Thank you. Rich, you mentioned the mutual ministry review. Is there a specific form for that? And how would you, because I don't recall having done that.
I have not done one in your parish in 11 years, so I don't know
Okay.
when the last one was, but it would be good to do it, and I'd love to come and do it. It's basically a guided conversation, and many of you have been through them with me, and it's a fairly simple format. What's going well? What's not going well? And are there ways we can help you? I can help you get unstuck. I mean, essentially that's it. But everybody gets a voice. Everybody gets to talk about it. And I think out of that sometimes comes some new directions, but not always. Sometimes it's just an affirmation of where we are.
Okay.
What it does do is a lot of our vestry meetings do not have that time built in. I also am a big believer in vestry retreats as well as mutual ministry reviews, so that you take some time, because otherwise everybody gets there. A lot of you meet now, I think, on Sunday afternoons, but a lot of vestry meetings still meet in the evening. Well, people are tired. They show up at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. You know, you want to get home. You have a lot going on. So this creates a space, and I think that's it. It's not there's nothing magical about it, Tina, but what it does is create space where everybody gets to kind of think through together. What is it we're about? What's our purpose?
Thank you.
Yep.
How long does it usually take? Or it depends.
An hour and 15 minutes or so. It shouldn't be a portion of a vestry meeting. It's better if it's a separate event. But never more than an hour and a half.
We have another, thank you. We have another question. I'm sorry. I don't know how to pronounce that first name.
Would that be
DH.
me? That's Heather Hutchinson from St. Peter's.
Heather, sorry about that. You're
That's
on,
fine.
Heather.
I just wanted to say I found the 10 Commandments. It's an interesting take on the commandments, but they were very relatable and comprehensive. And from that, I do want to say I apologize for sometimes not bringing my best self to vestry. It's sometimes difficult when I come from work and I go straight into the vestry meeting. So I will take note of my future meetings and bring my best self. Apologies.
Then our work here is done. That's great. And you won't get it right every time, but then there's a chance to learn. But good for you.
Yeah.
Minutes, anybody else? Lawrence Osborne.
Yeah, Laurie Osborne, All Saints. Thank you very much for a very constructive reminder on how to be a productive and sane group member. I have a question I hope is okay, and it's about how the church writ large, are there guidelines, historical or current, about taking stances on critical political issues? And also guidance about locally, obviously, vestry members may have strong political feelings about this or that, and certain church issues may wade into that. Are there sort of rules and guidance about how to handle that? I mean, obviously, I would love to have the national church take positions on things I think are crucial, and the same could be true about local issues. But I'm just wondering whether there's any guidance in advance of those kinds of possibly toxic topics surfacing. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. That's a really important question. And so the dividing line is that we are not allowed to endorse candidates. That's a violation of church and state. And we are called to speak out prophetically and convincingly and loudly about issues in our society. So the church has very clear teachings about gun violence, about climate change, about racism, numerous things. So we are called to be a prophetic voice in the church, just as Jesus, in church and in our society, just as Jesus was, and to proclaim that, but we can't endorse particular political candidates. Is that helpful?
Yeah, looks like yes.
Yep, that's a thumbs up from Larry.
You're
Okay,
muted. You can't hear.
he gave you a thumbs up, Bishop. I think we're just at 7 o'clock. Bishop Doug?
Are people okay with going another 5 minutes for questions? Are people okay with that? Again, I know you're busy, but if people have more questions and want to go 5 more minutes, we can do that. If everyone's okay with that.
Ori? You'll need to unmute.
Good evening. Rich, can you give me the name of that book? Again, I got the Failure of Nerve, but I didn't get the other one. Can you give me that again, please?
Yeah, sure, Maury. It's in the chat for others and for you, but it's Gil Rendell's Quietly Courageous, Leading the Church in a Changing World. His last name is Rendel. He's a Methodist, but he's okay.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to say really quickly, if there's not another question, and we're at time and or close to time, to the question that Lawrence asked. The bishop and I had a chance, what is it now, 10 years ago, to travel on a pilgrimage, Jonathan Daniels pilgrimage to Selma, Alabama. And I was in the room, we were in the room together where this man talked about, he was on the vestry at St. Paul's in Selma when they were trying to figure out, could they integrate? It sounds like a long time ago, but this guy, he was maybe 70 or 80 now, but he was a young vestryman at the time this happened. And he kept bringing up the vote, and he didn't do it until he finally said, yeah, we're going to do it. Like, so that wasn't a stand out in the world necessarily, but it was a stand about the world in which they found themselves. And he figured we need to integrate here, which was not a norm in that culture. Very controversial, but he just kept bringing it up month after month. The vote was like 1 to 13, and then it was 2 to 12, and then it was 3, until they finally got there, and then they made that move. I mean, the rector couldn't make that move unilaterally, and so that vestry had to work through that conflict. It was one of the most compelling things I've ever heard about how a vestry hung in there to deal with hard stuff at the time and came out on the right side of history because he was persistent. It was beautiful.
Yep. Thank you very much.
I think I saw another hand up there. Susan.
So, thank you, Bishop. I was looking at the 10 Commandments for vestry, and I'm particularly number 3, which I think is one that I'm going to have to spend some time on, because people who aren't afraid of conflict, resilient, non-anxious, we all respond differently to different topics. So, numbers make me very anxious, but my co-senior warden is very comfortable with talking about numbers. So I think, to try and speak to this particular one is going to be, I think, a little perplexing, because for some people are just not bothered at all by any topic, but others have little push buttons that get pushed. Just, that's all.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we always invite reflection on all these things. You see, these are our experiences, and you've got your experiences, which are really important. I've said numerous times to vestries that bring who you are forward, and you've made big decisions in your life. You've decided what schools to go to. You've decided what careers to take on. You've decided to change careers. You made all kinds of family decisions. And so you are very, very competent people who have made huge decisions in your life. And so bring that to the church. Bring your experience to the church. We need that. We value that. So I think people want to eat dinner right now, right? I think so, yeah. So again, thank you for your, not only for your hour of time for this tonight, but the experience and all that you bring, and your generosity to serving the church. I know you've got all busy lives, and so thank you for engaging in the church. And just to say, you are needed. Your voice is important, and you are not alone. Whatever difficulty your church is facing, other churches face it. Rich, Vicky, and I have faced it, and we are with you. Sometimes there's no easy answers, but you are not alone. You are not in isolation with the things that you face, and you're not in isolation with the things that you celebrate. It's the Jesus movement continues. It really does. And so we thank God for all that you do. So let's end with a short prayer. Living God, we thank you for this gathering tonight. We thank you for these leaders. We thank you for the for the wisdom and the experience that they bring to the Jesus movement. Living God, we ask that you continue to bless us, to give us the inner resources and the outer resources that we need to proclaim your word, to transform the world into the dream that you have for it. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
Amen.